Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from NASCAR.info, ready for a special late night owl stream here after the conclusion of an unexpected doubleheader, that is for Saturday rather, between the NASCAR Mexico Series at the LA Coliseum, as well as the Busch Light Clash at the Coliseum, the third race run there. Unofficially for the Mexico Series, Daniel Suarez pulling off the victory there. And we did have confirmation earlier this evening with Denny Hamlin pulling off the win in the Clash tonight. Definitely wanted to talk about the action from both of those races. And we'll also talk about the new Netflix series that, of course, has been making the rounds this week. And definitely wanted to discuss that as well. And we also kind of lead into the Daytona 500 here coming up in a couple of weeks after the Super Bowl here. Lots of action to discuss here, so we'll certainly get into it. First and foremost, I want to lead off here to congratulate NASCAR under these very difficult circumstances. I do feel absolutely terrible for the fans that were not able to attend this event, especially how hard NASCAR had worked to really mobilize as many fans as possible to come out for this event. In an ideal set of circumstances, yes, this would have been a great event to have tomorrow. Having it at night, having Machine Gun Kelly as the halftime show and everything. I think last year showed a lot of progress with making this a night race in particular, so you can see the torch, for example. I think was, again, I'm not sure about the long-term viability of the event, given how much effort has to go into actually producing this at the same time. But again, it's I think that, again, I feel terrible for anybody that wasn't able to attend this event. Very reminiscent of what was going on last year with the Fontana race there when we had the massive storms going through here. Again, living in California, it seems like, especially when I was in Southern California, it seemed like we would get one storm a year in February out of the entire year. You would get very hot in September, but then in February, you'd get like one storm that would roll through, and it'd always make front page news because it hardly ever rains in LA. And as long as we have this event in LA, there is always that 1 in 4 chance that it's going to land on that weekend. And this one seemed like a particularly exceptional one. With the so-called atmospheric river rolling through there, and we're expecting to get hit just as much as anybody else with that. It looks like it's going to be definitely a factor here the next couple of days. It's an unfortunate situation, and you just can't plan in advance of anything like that. I mean, obviously, the construction of this track by itself takes months, and the confirmation of even running this event was earlier on as well. So I hate it for the fans, first and foremost. And I think that it could probably be viewed as whatever their NASCAR solution was going to be to this was not going to be the best solution in general. There was going to be some people that were going to be left out, and that was unfortunate. And we didn't see the same attendance numbers that we saw even from last year's race as a result of that. But I think given the alternative, the fact that this is a temporary track, the fact that it's in LA, we're leading into Super Bowl week, there's such a narrow window there. I can't imagine that they were going to get this event in at all tomorrow, certainly, especially not tomorrow night when it had already been raining all day and you got local officials telling people to stay indoors. And I certainly don't think that this is going to be going through Monday, at least. The forecast seemed to indicate that it was going to be about 100% chance of rain well into the next day, if not the day after that, into Tuesday. And so you're looking at the possibility of having an exhibition event, not just for this series, but also the Mexico Series, having additional hotel costs, not just for the teams, but most importantly for the fans, or people that just leave and just aren't able, just left out of the situation there and wouldn't be able to attend the event. I mean, if this was stretched out to the end of this storm, it would probably be by Wednesday, and a lot of the positive motivation from especially the Netflix series, which again, we'll talk about tonight, I think would have really been dispelled from that. So I think NASCAR for once took a very proactive stance, a very risky stance. It still wasn't guaranteed that either of these events were going to get in tonight. The forecast into this evening about 6 or 7 o'clock here looked like that was going to be when the front of the storm was going to be coming in, and it was going to be a real problem. Hopefully the fans, as they're leaving the track now, are not still not getting caught up in that as well. The latest reports I saw during the race here seem to indicate right about now, about 8:45 Pacific, was when they were going to really start having the storms start to kind of come into the LA basin there, and that being a bit more of an issue. But again, the fact that they moved this forward, gave everybody about 6, maybe 7 hours notice of that. I mean, that's unfortunate. I mean, even us up here, we can't drive down there in that amount of time to get to the race there for that. So unless you were in the immediate area, if you're like in, Central California or anything like that, probably weren't going to be able to make it out for the event with that short of a notice. But the fact that they got both of those events in, the fact that, especially the Mexico Series race, which I think was going to be the major focus of this event, certainly was going to be the focus of my coverage if I was going to be down at the event this weekend, and really kind of, getting to know some of these drivers and really kind of see the kind of racing that they put on. That was going to be extremely important. And so the fact that they got both of those in, as much as I'm sure NASCAR is going to, will have lost a lot of money from, having Saturday be open, for fans, that was part of their own creation. They should have really allowed fans to be in there from the beginning. Then they wouldn't have had to basically give free access about 2 weeks before the event there. That would have been a much different situation for them. So yeah, I mean, again, it's going to be, it was going to be a different situation from that. So, again, kudos to NASCAR for getting that in there and for getting those events in. I think that that's hopefully something that maybe is going to be more the norm for NASCAR's plans with rain delays in the future. Especially, I know forecasting is unpredictable, and we've actually been kind of sniped by a lot of things up here where it seems like it's going to be a big storm or a big breeze, and then it turns out to not be anything or something like that. But maybe that's something that NASCAR can look into. I don't know if it's going to be simpler or more difficult where it's a points-paying race, especially if we're getting into the chase, or the playoffs rather, and you get later in the year and moving up a race for that's a, highly anticipated one. Is this something that's going to be a trend more going forward? I think that's going to be a good question there. But maybe that will be, because I think, honestly, one thing that's always irritated, I've never been a big fan of rain delay coverage. I've been very open about that on this show. Whenever they switch to these, these drivers and talking to them in the infield, and that could be fun to do. I've been on the other side of that at Darlington before. But it doesn't particularly interest me. Whenever I see that start to happen, it's like, okay, I know it's going to be at least 2 hours until they get this race started, whatever the track is, even if it were a track this small versus, Daytona or a road course that's like way bigger. That's usually just my side, like, okay, I'm going to put a movie on or something else instead. If there's a way, if that there's a storm like a Chicago, street course kind of storm coming in, and that seemed to be kind of what this situation was. I think that's something they can really look at. And again, I don't know how possible that would be. I don't know how popular that would be with fans. Maybe that's something they could discuss with the fan council going forward. But I think that would be something else to look at. So hopefully that works out, because I think the drivers were definitely supportive of this. There were a lot of reports from people at the track there talking about drivers really applauding this, really encouraging NASCAR with that. And at a time where there's a bit of tension still between NASCAR and the drivers themselves over the lingering charter disputes, maybe that's also a little bit of an advantage towards that coming up. But yeah, I think that was the best they could do under a bad situation. Chicago, they really worked out dodging the raindrops and making sure, the drainage of the track worked out well. But even in that case, we really didn't get the Xfinity race in on that one. And even the Cup race had to be shortened. In this event here, we got both of them in. Again, I'm not sure what the reports are. I mean, again, if you're watching this from the track, definitely make sure to mention in the chat here. Certainly before the storm there, hopefully people are, again, able to safely get out of the LA area and seek shelter here before the heavy stuff comes in. Storms here in California aren't generally the same as what you would experience maybe in other parts of the country. But again, there are possibilities of mudslides and so forth in the LA area. Certainly driving out of the area there too. So certainly hope all fans that attend this are having a safe trip home there at the same time. So yeah, I think that's the first thing you get that should be mentioned from this. I think that for whatever pros and cons and weighing all that in there. I think that there's a net positive to perhaps how NASCAR is going to be handling rain shortened races, or the threat of rain when it's very clearly going to be 100% and going to be a real big problem. That's something that they could look at there at the same time. So I think that'll be another part to look at. But also, too, at the same time, really, I really enjoyed, and I guess we could do this in any order. We probably can go ahead and just go into the Mexico race since that one just wrapped up right now. Again, congratulations to Daniel Suarez for pulling that off. Again, this was an event I felt really wasn't promoted nearly as much as it needed to be. I was very disappointed by that this week. This should have been hyped right alongside the rest of the promotions for the Busch Clash earlier this week, as well as the NFL playoffs and the promotions from there. That itself was kind of shanked already because they're talking about the Daytona 500, and then they'd say, oh, by the way, there's also this race that's on the other side of the country, and it's going to be 2 weeks earlier, and it's going to have the Mexico series, and it's going to be this and that, and it's just confusing. Like, it would have been risky, but perhaps a risk well-founded, to just put all your eggs in the basket of promoting the Busch Clash, making sure people understood when the event was, not just when the event starts, but the fact that there were, again, free access for Saturday, which was already known, later in the playoffs here, and that you would have like 2 days of access, and there was going to be this Mexico series, and really promoting these different drivers in it. It was just a day late, $1 short with the broadcast here today, and not making, something about moving the event up. I think if they still had this event tomorrow, it would have played out exactly the same way that they promoted it here, with kind of a last second description of some of the drivers in the field there. Luckily, the practice session also presented an opportunity to talk about it, and I did feel like the broadcast did a solid job of that. But again, that shouldn't have been the first time we heard about these drivers. And also, that was the thing that was surprising this week in putting together my entry list storylines. I was surprised that it's like, where's the entry list for this race? And why did it take until, what was it, late on Thursday? Pretty much like right after I posted my entry list articles, when they finally had a condensed version of it. But on the NASCAR media page, the screenshots that I posted a couple of days, I guess it was last Wednesday before I had the article up, those were available on the NASCAR media site, which means that every media outlet out there that covers the sport had access to those files. They could have distributed them and made them public and put it out there. It certainly shouldn't have been me putting it out there. And so hopefully other people were, but at least the ones that I follow on my page, I wasn't seeing any information on that. So that was disappointing. I really wish that there was a lot more attention to it. It just seemed like it was compressed into it. And then when you had the weather on top of it, it was compressed into an even shorter amount of time. And one of those things was within everybody's control, and one of them certainly wasn't. So I guess you can look at it both ways there. But I really wish this event was hyped a lot more along with the Clash. It should have been brought up in equal weight to it, especially the fact that the series is coming up to the U.S., that it has drivers in it that have had connections with NASCAR's top 3 series, whether it's Jorge Getters as the pole sitter to the inaugural Xfinity race at Mexico City in 2005, whether it's Max Gutierrez, who's competing in the Truck Series part-time. It's not just Suarez, and I know it's tempting and very easy to just focus on that one driver, and not to say that he isn't deserving of that notice. I mean, obviously, this is where he cut his teeth before getting into being an Xfinity champion, and now a winner in the Cup Series as well. But these other drivers shouldn't have been overlooked in that sense there. And I feel like they're catching up on that in the broadcast a little bit, but that shouldn't have been the start of it. But I guess at the end of the day, it's, better to be, better late than never, I suppose. But, and again, it was also a shame, you had on top of this, you had the defending series champion Salvador de Alba gets in an accident in practice, doesn't have a backup car, and isn't able to start the race. That was too bad, too. Again, obviously people couldn't have prepared for that under those circumstances there. But again, to understand the different storylines from these drivers in the field, I was thinking that maybe this would be an opportunity, to really start fresh, and that, a lot of these races, when you watch Mexico Series races, they're in Spanish, and not everybody, speaks that, certainly among NASCAR fans. There's certainly a contingent, obviously, but, for somebody brushing up on the sport there, you really need to get that information. I feel like the series was really trying to get that information out there by having that bilingual driver's guide that was published, and having, having both available so that everybody can be aware of these drivers and learn more about them. And I thought that was going to be something that was going to be really emphasized a lot more, but that really was kind of just a little bit, it was just a little lacking there. And I know that the Clash is the big draw. Obviously, it's the first time we see, drivers with their new teams. There's, the new body styles for the Toyota and the Ford. There's a lot of speculation about, and it's of course an appetizer still, even in its form now being in LA, it's still something that gets you even more excited for Daytona because it's still a short race. It's, it's over pretty quick, even with the, the number of cautions that we have in these events. It's still over really quick. I feel pretty fresh just even after seeing these two races back to back, compared to say, a day that had a couple points races back to back. But I would have liked to see that promoted a lot more. I don't know if we're going to get this again. Hopefully we do, because I think those drivers put on a fantastic show. We saw a lot of exchanges for the lead. Suarez may have won, but I mean, the results are not going to indicate how much of an absolute fight that was. I mean, Garcia was really tough, as you would expect somebody that's a 4-time champion in that series to be. And, and then Delara and these other drivers up there actually being competitive with them, and actually, and seeing these cars handle so well on a track like this. I mean, the Cup cars seem like they really had to fight their way around it, but these cars had such good grip from center off and could roll this, and the aggressive body stance, similar to Cup cars were back in the early 2000s, where they would rear up and then the nose would chomp down into the pavement going into the corners. These cars had tremendous amounts of grip. They looked like they were going at least a second faster than the Cup cars. That may not have actually been the case. It was hard to tell because we didn't really have full timing and scoring like we had for the Cup series there. But it would have been interesting to compare. Maybe other people have that data. But I was very pleased with that series. I hope that it's a sign of things to come, where maybe they're going to have more races here in the U.S. Does this mean that NASCAR may go down to Mexico City again and try the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez or some of the other courses down there? That's always a possibility. I think NASCAR has been looking into international races, as they apparently had with going up to the other border there from Montreal. So yeah, I mean, who knows what's going to be possible here in the near future. But, again, I think I wish that event was really promoted more. I feel like an opportunity was passed, and they'll probably blame it on the weather and other stuff here, but I think that's kind of a cop-out. I think that that's something that really should have been tackled a lot more. But I enjoyed the race. I enjoyed seeing a lot of the competitors in there. Enjoyed seeing Jorge Getters, even though his race did not go as well as he had planned. In fact, if you don't count the withdrawal of last year's champion, he was your last car driver there. I hope you guys enjoyed the international. I had I had to use some translations there to get my graphics updated for that race. So I hope you enjoyed that as well on the Twitter feed. And I do plan on doing an article on the last place finisher from that event. I'll probably split it up between both Getter's last place run there with the kind of rough night that he was having there, as well as a driver that withdrew there in last year's championship driver there. So I think that that'll be kind of the way I approach it. And of course, the article for the Clash at the same time too. So we'll have both of those up there for you guys later tonight, if not into tomorrow here at the same time. But Getters was shown, I believe, in the 21st spot of the 21 drivers that actually started the race. You did have Regina Cant starting at the back of the field there, the one female driver in the field. Unfortunately, she had some issues there, lost some laps there in the early stages. Then you had the issues with Getters there, with the hood popping up, losing a couple laps, getting back out on the track, and then ultimately dropping out in about the last 20 or 30 laps of the event there. We'll see. I guess we don't really have those results on Racing Reference as much. Hopefully that changes. I know they're always expanding things and getting other series there. I was consulting their website as well as that resource that NASCAR Media had up there this week to kind of compile the entry list storylines this week. So I hope you enjoyed that content as well. I wanted to really kind of, again, try to do my part as well, not just sit on the sidelines and complain about other people, trying to do my own thing here and bring up these drivers. So, yeah, again, I think I'm glad that I was very skeptical of having Adam Alexander and Michael Waltrip in the booth for this race. I thought they would just kind of phone it in and they'd just be like, just focus on Daniel Suarez for the entire race. There was quite a bit of that. I think, disproportionate to how many laps he actually led in this event or how late in the event he actually took the lead. But I thought they did a decent job. I like that they brought up Eloy Sebastian's nickname as the Falcon and things like that. I mean, that was better, and bringing up Ruben Garcia's championships. I think that was a good step in the right direction there. And yeah, again, just remarking at the quality of the competition. I felt like we didn't miss as much of the action in the Mexico Series broadcast as we clearly did in the Cup Series. I don't know if they changed directors halfway through or something, but we didn't have nearly as many of those tight shots. I think one part of it, of course, is they didn't have onboard cameras for these cars, so that eliminated some of the toys. I always talk about the trick shots that these broadcasts do, especially Fox is very guilty of this. They rely so much on just trying to make it look cool, ignoring the fact that this sport already is cool as it is. Just show it how it is and let us see the competition. Let us see these cars like hanging on, going through the corners, and that could be interesting. But instead, you'll have incidents like we had in the Clash itself, where you get Chase Elliott bounces off the wall, and in turn 2, meanwhile in turn 4, the camera's already pointed at Bubba Wallace right as he's starting to get spun, and then the camera cuts away and shows neither of those things happening, and just misses everything. It's unfortunate, and I hate to kind of ramp this up already before we even get to the Daytona 500, but it looks like Fox isn't really changing too much of their strategy, at least from the directorial side. On the broadcasting side, we'll kind of transition into the Clash discussion here. Kevin Harvick in the booth. He and Clint Boyer aren't really meshing very well. Everything felt kind of awkward still. I guess you can't be too critical about that because this is the first time they've all been in the booth together. They just made it look extremely obvious that was the case. I always felt Harvick felt a lot more comfortable in those drivers-only broadcasts. I think when he had more of a leadership role in there where you didn't have an actual play-by-play guy. I thought he and Mike Joy did decent off each other there. But Harvick and Boyer I've never been a really big fan of Boyer's broadcasting style. I think he goofs around too much and doesn't really contribute much in his remarks. Like Benny Parsons would take things very lightly as well, but when things got serious, he wouldn't keep doing that. With Boyer, I don't think he has that kind of filter, and that's kind of the issue I've had with that. But looking at the event itself, your last place finisher in that one, Todd Gilland, first time the number 38 cars finished last in the Clash, whether at Daytona or in Los Angeles. The last place battle at the very beginning of it looked like it was going to be between Ryan Blaney and John Hunter Nemechek. Blaney having to squeeze into the field in the very last qualifying group and really was struggling to kind of climb his way up there. We saw in pretty much each one of those groups any new drivers that came in there, any big-name drivers, whether it's Alex Bowman or Brad Keselowski or even Justin Haley driving for Rick Ware's team. They would start off at the back of the field, kind of get their feet under them, and then gradually build back up. And then by the end of the session, they're clicking off laps that they would ordinarily be doing. They'd be about as competitive as they would be at any other track. And we did see that. It was very much like that back in 2022 when these cars were first going out there and running, really, really slow laps, just kind of understanding, how fast they could go and how much more speed they could get into the corners. We're still seeing that each year, which I think is something that's interesting about this track and this particular event here. But it did look like it was going to be a battle between those two drivers at the back of the field there. Then Noah Gragson dropped to the back. His first race with Stewart-Haas Racing did not go, I'm sure, as well as he would have anticipated. I think things are still very much up in the air as to how different this is going to be from last year with the Legacy Motor Club and all the struggles that he had in the Cup Series last year. Is this an issue with his performance in this car? I would say it's Stewart-Haas's team, even with the struggles they've had with sponsorship and a very indeterminate future that they're facing right now with a very different driver lineup that's very heavy on Xfinity Series regulars. What's going to be happening with Gragson's team going through this year. I think it's very early to tell, but this was not a promising start. He did not seem competitive at all through the event, lost multiple laps under green without any accidents, without really suffering any damage to his car, was just slow. And for a driver of his nature, where he had been so good in the Xfinity Series, and at times, real aggressive, of course, even at very treacherous tracks like Darlington and so forth, it was disappointing to see him not really pick up the speed that much more in this event. He was at the back of the field there and was still right around the other competitors in the back of the pack when Todd Gilland had apparently a brake situation. The brakes were very bright red on the front of his car. Back end got away from him, and he hit the wall pretty hard with the left front. Didn't seem like it was going to be really serious damage. It seemed like we saw more damage when Eric Almirola had an incident in practice this race a couple of years ago. But in this case here, it was enough to take him out of the race, and he ends up towed to the infield. Thankfully, seeing him climb out of the car okay. But a short afternoon for him after 68 laps there, listed as brake failure in the official results, looking at the results right here. Chase Elliott, again, mentioning his suspension issue after he bounced off the wall in turn 2, gets 22nd spot. Justin Haley, again, I really want to emphasize this again, how impressive Rick Ware Racing was in this event. Kaz Gralla, on one hand, really struggled. He was pretty much slowest in practice. Didn't really have much of a shot there in qualifying, so an unfortunate deal for him. I don't know if a 2-day event would have helped things on that front. But with Justin Haley, I know the questions have already been around ever since he announced that he was going to be moving over to Rick Ware Racing and driving the 51 car. What was he thinking? And is this a better job, better ride than he had ever had over at Colleague Racing? And we saw, and you think back, and I know the drivers, lots happened since then, shall we say. But Cody Ware, first year of this event in the 51 car, very nearly qualified for the main event, had a very good showing in his heat race and almost qualified for the event. And then his teammate at the time was Ryan Preece, and Preece qualified for the main event there. Unfortunately, had a mechanical situation kind of similar to what happened to Haley here in this case, and dropped out of the event. So it's not unforeseen that Rick Ware Racing would have a good performance at the Clash here. But Haley himself, showed some speed. He had that famous incident with Kyle Larson in the inaugural event, and seems to just get a good showing there out of the 31 car. And it's nice to see that carry over. So you perhaps had a driver and a team that have had a good performance advantage in this race. Maybe not for the win, but, the fact that he was able to lead his group in qualifying, the fact he was top 10 in practice, I think people should be very excited about what he can be doing this year. We'll see what happens with the 15. Hopefully Gralla can pick things up. I know Gralla was originally going to be driving for Starcom Racing, at least at one point there, when they were looking into 2022. It was Gralla who tested Starcom's car before the team went under and they had to sell their assets. By the way, congratulations to Starcom for working on their effort now in the TCR division there in endurance racing. We just had that announced back on February 1st. But Haley here in the meantime, I think I'm going to be watching him at Daytona in particular, especially given the fact that, yes, he won that lightning shortened race at Daytona a couple of years ago with Spire Motorsports. He might have something to say if he has a good performance in qualifying, or if he does pretty well in the duels. I mean, I think I wouldn't rule anything out about his performance in that sense. So it's unfortunate the race results aren't going to show it. You do see the 10th place qualifying starting spot here, but unfortunately a 21st place finish. Excuse me. But rounding out the bottom 5, Noah Gragson and Michael McDowell are your bottom 5 there at the same time. But just looking at the race results from here, again, congratulations to Denny Hamlin for pulling off the victory there. Again, not the dominant car of the day, led 58 laps to Ty Gibbs 84. Heartbreaker for Gibbs for sure. That was actually Lasbro's pick to win the race there. I picked Preece, looking to kind of follow up with Preece's run from last year. Unfortunately, Preece really wasn't as much of a factor there. Got back on the lead lap, but still ended up back in 11th spot there at the finish. But Ty Gibbs had put on a tremendous show. You remember in this race last year was where his foam caught fire in the door during practice, and had a very scary situation, very reminiscent of what we had seen with Chris Buescher and other drivers earlier in the 2022 season. And then Gibbs came back and had a decent run after that. Had a great showing out here. I think this is a driver and a team that you're really going to have to watch out for. And I'm not the first person to be saying that. I know there were some people doing their preview videos that were pointing out that 54 team is one you're going to have to watch this year. I really hoped that he was going to win last season. I thought he was getting pretty close to doing it. Unfortunately, didn't turn out that way. But I don't think I think he had a solid season. I think he certainly had a better season than Noah Gragson had. Obviously, ran all the races for one thing. But again, I think that's going to be one guy you're going to have to watch this year in terms of a marked improvement. I put him in the same category as Justin Haley there in the 51 team in terms of programs you're going to have to watch. But Denny Hamlin pulling off the win. Kyle Busch in the second spot. Ryan Blaney coming from last on the grid to finish third. That was getting a lot of attention from the booth there during the race, and I think deservedly so in this case. Fourth place to Joey Logano, and fifth to Kyle Larson. I think the other thing that's interesting with this race is who did not qualify for it. I think that while this was not intentional, because of course there was going to be heat races and last chance qualifier before they got scrubbed because of the weather coming in, I think the qualifying format that they used this time around was actually something pretty compelling. There were some people on Twitter that were making comparisons to Bump Day at the Indy 500 and how none of these drivers were locked into the field. And, okay, Blaney was going to start because he was last year's champion and they had basically a champion's provisional for the last spot there. If he needed it, and it turned out he did because he was only about 26 at the end of Group 5. But again, to see Christopher Bell not make it, to see Daniel Suarez not make it when he would go on to win the Mexico race, Chris Buescher, for how well he had competed at the end of last year. These are not drivers that necessarily you would think were real standouts in the Clash necessarily, but certainly drivers that have been good on enough of other tracks that you would expect them to be in the field in this. But this did open the opportunity for other drivers like Justin Haley, like John Hunter Nemechek, who came back from the back of the field to finish in 13th. Other competitors like Ryan Preece even for having Stuart Haas's entry in there. But yeah, I liked that we had a little bit of drama in there, even compressed into the one day. I think that worked out for NASCAR. I'm glad they didn't have to just. I'm glad they didn't just go by practice itself. It would have been very easy for them to make that decision. But to still have these little qualifying heats, I mean, not really heat races, but like a 4-minute stretch where you had just a few cars on the track at the time, instead of just like a big thing that's going to have a bunch of wrecks and just be a mess. Like have just enough cars out there where they can kind of give each other space and actually try to compete against each other for better laps. And you would see a little bit of strategy. You'd see some people that would flat spot tires. We saw that out of Gragson. We saw that out of Blaney. But then you'd also see drivers that, would maybe lay back a little bit and try to get a good run, or maybe they'd have to pass some slower traffic out there, or maybe slower traffic would try to get out of the way to make sure they're not in the way of somebody else. It was cool to see the strategy, what bits of it we could see. Again, I do think that's still a shortcoming of Fox's broadcasting strategy. But I liked the approach because that was one step closer to, having qualifying matter, honestly. In a time now where you just have these 36 chartered teams out here, I like that that's something that's still on the table. Yes, it's for an exhibition, but, again, it's heartbreaking for any of those teams that don't qualify for the event, just as much as it would have been if we had last chance qualifiers. And you got guys like J.J. Yaley or so forth that were competing up there that just kind of missed the cut in those cases. But yeah, I thought that was really good. It reminded me a bit of David Land's video where he talked about revitalizing the Brickyard 400 and suggesting, having practice and qualifying kind of stretch out later in the week and having storylines built around those personalities and then having elimination rounds so that the only drivers that are in the field have earned their spot through something similar to like the duels or this format here, that it made the race more exclusive in that sense. And that it wasn't a safety net for anybody, if you didn't qualify for the event, it was treated as if you had qualified for the event, but you just had a poor finish. Again, somebody that maybe crashes at the beginning of the race, somebody that'd be competing for last place. But instead, maybe they had 30 drivers qualifying for the race or something, and maybe you have 6 chartered guys that don't make it. But they still get their attention in that one. I'm glad that whatever the arrangement is with NASCAR and the charter system, and, again, I don't know if maybe this is another offshoot of the ongoing charter debates themselves, that something like that is still on the table there too, that these sponsors aren't pouting as much and saying, well, wait a minute, why isn't my car in this race? It's like, well, in this case, you cap the field at 23 because they tried going to 27, which still would have left 9 chartered teams on the sidelines anyway. And then it just got to the point where everybody was running into everybody. There wasn't enough room. In this one here, we actually got the cars spaced out enough, even with very low attrition, that they could actually race each other. No, but I think I think it's another positive to certainly be looking at that. Let's see here. So yeah, I think in terms of the competition itself, I thought the race was solid. I thought I mean, it was certainly cleaner than last year. Definitely Ty Gibbs' dominance, the fact that he had the lead by as big of a margin he had. We saw the same thing out of Denny Hamlin, but I loved that lap traffic played a role. I mean, a lot of people gripe about lap traffic. It's like, why are these guys out here? Why blah blah blah? But you can't legislate away lap traffic. You just can't. You have a race like this, we have 23 cars out here, drivers that had to each one of them earn their spot in this field, knowing that they weren't guaranteed at all to start this race. I mean, it could have just as easily been a flip of a coin. Josh Williams came agonizingly close to this. If he got through turn 3 and 4, just a slight bit better than he did in the first round of that practice session, he would have been in the show and Briscoe would have been out. And that would have been the difference right there. So these guys all earned their spot, in this race, and yeah, I think that they put on a solid show here, and again, I think that there's something that still could be said about the short track package that the Cup cars had. I think the Mexico Series race should really bring that into focus because I think they easily had a more competitive and more interesting race than the Clash was. I felt like the first stage in particular, before the 75 lap break, and it's unfortunate the musical act got canceled, but that's a whole other deal there. But, that first half, they could have got that done in maybe 20 minutes. They pretty much got through the whole thing before they actually had an incident there with the Todd Gilland spin. And that went by like very quickly. So, again, I think that was a situation there where things could have, well, that certainly helped out with the rain for sure, because they had such a small window to get this in. But I think that's another part to look at there too. But I think the Mexico race, yeah, you still had. It's not just about wrecks. I want to caution against saying that that's what makes it better, because I think in both cases you get cars that were spinning out and stuff, and yeah, we had apparently had some confrontations in the garage area. I mean, there's a video that's been surfacing about Ty Gibbs and Joey Logano perhaps continuing their bit of a bump and run deal that happened in Martinsville last fall. It's good to see, and I think it's a great thing that NASCAR can really hype up going into the Daytona 500 here in a couple weeks. But that's another thing to certainly look at there too. But I think the Mexico Series race, what I was very impressed with was, yeah, again, the body attitude of the cars, the fact they were able to chomp down in the corners and really get some good runs around there. And also the fact that whenever they made contact, it wouldn't immediately spin somebody out. These guys were able to get these things deadlocked sideways and save it, or even get nerfed out of the groove and still be able to stay in it and stay like 2 or 3 wide with traffic. If the camera had caught some of these moves a bit better. I know there was one where I believe it was Calderon was falling through the field there after being towards the front of the field. He was in a situation where he was able to kind of drop back, but then he kind of defended his position again on the outside. I thought it was a thoroughly entertaining race. And it really I think it should be a positive example, especially being on the exact same track that they had the Cup Series compete on, to look into what makes this special. I felt like I was watching like a Hooters Pro Cup race or an old ARCA or like Southwest Tour race. Kind of felt like an old late model race there, but not like so much downforce that they can't get side by side, that they can't have a very physical race. These cars seem to have very tapered noses. Again, not with a big splitter or anything on it. They had a nice valence on it. That the attitude of the car, the weight transfer could happen and everything. It's just the car, somebody described this online. I like the way they put it, where they said the car looked very alive. The Cup car is just so stiff. It's just so, it's got this real stiff, square, like feel to it. It looks both too strong and too fragile at the same time, where you have like this really sturdy body that just nothing happens to it. If you hit anything, we're just starting to get crumple zones back. But at the same time, you have these wheels where the toe link just is really fragile. And if you get any kind of a, wheel banging side to side thing, the the car is just completely destroyed and you can't get back out there because you're not going to be able to fix that in 6 minutes. In these cars, you had none of those concerns. These guys were just wailing on each other and saving it. I mean, I think it really speaks to the talent of the drivers in that series as well. These cars look like they were very fast, but they were a handful too. And when there was a spin, it really took a lot to really kind of spin one of these guys out. Not to say it didn't happen, because it did. But yeah, very physical. And then you had cut tires, and you had comers and goers. You had drivers that were up there and drivers that fell back. It was just a thoroughly entertaining race. I think the fact that it came after the clash, which again was that's just how it turned out with things with the weather and all that. I think that's going to bring that into a lot more focus. So if anything else, maybe that's going to be something that the drivers can point at and say, hey, I'd kind of like to drive these cars. I'd be very interested to hear what Suarez thinks after, his car came up short of qualifying for the main event. And then he gets into this other car here and he's able to just flog it out there and not have the dominant car either, but be able to pull off the victory in the same number of laps. So I think that was really good. So hopefully we'll see something closer to that. As to the future of the event, I mean, again, I always like that this race is still, I like that it's still relatively close. I mean, that track's basically about 6 hours here from NASCAR headquarters. I enjoyed covering it in 2022. I like that they have support events because that was a big problem in the first year. There was just a lot of open time that you had people walking on the track and stuff, and that's fine and everything. But you can do that in the space of an hour. You don't need like half a day to do that. And they did have the same issue where they weren't letting fans into the track until qualifying at night, which is a problem because that was over in like 20 minutes. So it certainly didn't excuse, the trip for most people there. Never mind, the cost of parking if that were the case. So I think that was another part of it. But, again, I'm not entirely against this event. I know that there's a lot of people talking about going back to Daytona and how important, the clash was to starting things off. But I think that could be accomplished just as well with Cup qualifying or the opening practice to Daytona. I think that could be done there to really kind of stretch the weekend and have those storylines. We're not seeing that now because, of course, now you have it right after the Super Bowl, so that takes Sunday out of the equation. There was that great discussion on Denny Hamlin's podcast this week where Jordan Bianchi and Jeff Gluck were on his show there and talking about that, and they extrapolate on this better than I could on this. But I think that was another thing that really, really kind of worked in that sense there. I think that you could still have the clash, be it standalone thing. It's just unfortunate that it's straddling the Super Bowl on either side. I think that's a big problem because you have a lot of momentum, especially this year with the Netflix show, and we'll still get into that. I want to get into that next year. But you had that, and then you kind of go into, you want to go into the 500. You got your biggest race coming up, and then in between, you kind of have the momentum broken, especially if it's on the same network. It's not this year with the Super Bowl, but you have a situation there where, everybody's focus is going to be on that, and then you're still kind of having it in the news even by Wednesday when you're having qualifying. And then the problem on top of that is that I agree, especially with Jordan's perception of this, that we've reached like what's too little in terms of practice. That maybe the way we had it in 2019 earlier was too much practice. But we're definitely on the other end of it now, where, especially whether you're a big team or a small team, where, these teams aren't able to fully diagnose any issues or issues that probably could be solved very easily if they had a 1 hour practice versus maybe a 15 or 20 minute practice instead of having to jump right into qualifying and then that car better be ready. I'm sure Denny Hamlin, in his case at Homestead, he would have much rather his team figured out that issue with the steering rack rather than just rush through practice and qualifying, go out there in the race and hope that nothing happens. There's always going to be some risk. There's only so much you can prepare for. But the more practice you have to consider that as less laps that have to be done on the track during the race. Because if anything happens during the race, it could just completely take you out of the equation. And we heard this from BJ McLeod last year. One of the teams that we did not see in the clash this year because, of course, their charter got sold to Spire Motorsports. And then Zane Smith ended up running the slowest lap in all of qualifying this weekend. You heard from BJ McLeod that a lot of times they would get the setup worked out later in the race. But the problem is going through the first stage, or maybe even the first two stages, they were struggling to keep pace because either there's so little attrition that you don't have a caution to come in to make an adjustment, or they just don't have enough time in the garage area to work every issue out the same way the other teams have. And I guess they don't have the same simulator time the big teams have, or even access to the same equipment that would require that. And then that just takes them out completely. So they'll have a great setup, but by then they're 4 or 5 laps down, if not more. They may end up even having to go to the garage area to diagnose an even more serious issue. And that's a problem I don't think is just for small teams. I think that's something that manifests itself for larger teams as well. But I think that's another thing to kind of look at. Another reason to really kind of look at why practices should be as important as it is. So I think it's another thing to look at the same time. Thank you for the super chats. My goodness, I was checking these here. I want to make sure I catch up on these as well. Beast of Metal, thank you for yours here. First of all, previous super chat retracted because I didn't realize until the stream started they literally moved it today. Apologies for the garbage post. Well, I'm sure whatever it was, it wasn't a problem there, but I do appreciate it, Beast of Metal. Yeah, kind of an unusual day here with everything getting moved up to today. I know I was just as surprised as everybody else was early this afternoon here when the news came across, and it's like, okay, I wasn't even sure I had all my stuff charged up ready for the show today. Luckily, all that worked out there, and we were able to get that going. I know that it also caught off guard Tim Clark and the folks over at NASCAR in getting the scanner to stuff to work, and ultimately they were able to get that set. Hopefully, everything will still be fine for the Daytona 500 and the support events here coming up very shortly, but we'll get to that point at the same time too. But again, thank you for the super chat there for that. Kurzov, thank you for your super chat as well. Tony Baldwin Motorsports video idea. Hey, I'm open to that. I know a lot of you have been asking about Rise of the Field fillers. I do have more episodes than that in the works. That was among this off season. I'll tell you what. I don't know if it was just the lack of silly season stories. Again, kind of like Jeff Gluck mentioned on the stream on his appearance on Denny's show the other day. But this is probably the quickest off season that I've ever had go by. It's just been so busy. We got the Derek Cope book out at the beginning of it. I guess we had the Formula One race in Las Vegas. Did a bit of focus on that. I had to I guess we had the other 500 Days episode come out around Christmas. Then we had the videos that were getting we had the issue with the copyright thing with NASCAR that got cleared up. And then from there in January, my focus has just been working on writing these other scripts and getting those ready to go. As I mentioned, and those of you in the Patreon already know this, you have information on which scripts I'm working on here. We got like 5 different videos in the works here. So Kurzov, I like the idea. I may get to that at some point. I'm still kind of jumping through some hoops on these here, but I'm not against that either. I think Tommy Baldwin has a very interesting story. I think that his program, especially the Cup program, when they got into the series in 2009 and how they grew over those few years, I think that's a very interesting story. So yes. Bowser Jr. XD, thank you for your super chat as well. I ended up shuttering my blog that I did last year. Couldn't wholeheartedly commit to it. Lesson learned that blogs are not for the faint of heart. Well, again, it's too bad. I like Bowser. I liked your statistics there on the intervals. I think that's very interesting. It's too bad the blog didn't work out for you, but hopefully, if you find a good outlet for it, I definitely encourage you to keep that going, because I think those are some interesting statistics. Maybe you can do it through social media instead. Sometimes that can kind of work out there. Although I know if you're worried about something that's not for the faint of heart, I'm afraid social media is much worse than the blog universe right now. Not sure what the best outlet is for that, but I hope that you find something for that, because I do think that your statistics were definitely interesting there at the same time. I saw some comments here asking about the Norm Benning story. I wish I could tell you more than I can right now. I actually have a direct message in relation to that I still need to get back to here. I probably shouldn't go public with too much more than I know on this. All I can say is stay tuned. I don't really have new information on that. We're still sorting things out as to where things are, what things are looking like for Daytona, what things are looking like for the rest of the season. That's still getting kind of sorted out. I hope that in this next week, we're really at the point now where we're going to be very close to getting entry lists published anyway for Daytona. And obviously at that point, things will be very much clearer what's going on there. But I do need to talk to Norm, and I need to talk to another person that was interested in the sponsorship there, about what's going on with that and what information I could discuss on that. Because I would like to get some other information on this. It's a tricky balance because I'm not really in charge of like setting all this up or anything like that. I mean, Norm's got his own thing and the sponsors got their own thing. And I really the biggest thing I've been trying to do is just kind of, I'm just going to disclose what information I can, whatever they're cool with bringing up here. But I don't want to say anything or do anything that's going to screw something up because we're kind of at that point now here. I do want to say thank you to everyone that showed interest in the GoFundMe. I know that's a very desperate situation there when that comes up. And I don't know where the status of that is. That's why I took that off the page there. As far as I know, if they don't reach that goal, you should be refunded the amount that you have on there. We'll see how that works out. But again, I think that's up to what goes on with Norm and the sponsor. I just want to get the information out there of what is happening with this. But yeah, as to what the team is that he's looking to drive for, what their arrangement is, or how close they are with that, I just can't go into that stuff right now. And it's not so much. I'm not trying to do like a certain other story that came up during the 24 hours of Daytona. I'm not interested in chumming things for clicks or anything. It's just I just don't want to screw it up for the other people involved here, and that can happen. Sometimes something comes out, it gets leaked, and then the whole thing blows up, and that's the last thing I want to have. So that's where I am with that. So, but I will tell you, the moment I am free to talk more about this, I will absolutely bring that up, and because you guys are absolutely owed information on this and figuring out what's going on with that. But yeah, things are still just in a state of flux right now. We're at the point now where things may or may not happen, but that's going to be a discussion for another day here. But that day is going to be very soon because, yeah, we're down to just, we're just over a week. I guess about 10 days or so from the Truck Series race at Daytona. Yeah, things are going to be very clear at that point. So, so we're getting to that point. But I do appreciate you guys checking in on that. And hopefully we'll get some more information on that too. Connor Ritchie, I see your comment there on TRG Motorsports. I'm sure you're getting a lot of thoughts about that team since the 71 car is back in the lineup there with the third Spire Motorsports entry that Zane Smith is running this year. Does bring back memories to when the 71 car was running with Kevin Buckler's team. And you mentioning David Gilland and Andy Lally. That was an interesting team back then. I think that was a team that had the first last place finish because of a power steering failure. That seemed like that was unusual. That was the other thing with those starting parks that was fascinating, is it seemed like a lot of them would use kind of traditional reasons out, but then sometimes they would use kind of an unusual one at the same time. And then sometimes even there was an article that was done, I think it was the Brickyard in 2010, where they showed the reason that the driver was listed out, and then they actually had an interview with the driver, and then what the driver said was the reason they got taken out didn't necessarily match the race result. And I thought that was fascinating. I wish I knew who wrote that. I think it was something from NASCAR.com back when they had writers there. But I thought that was really interesting. That's kind of one of the things I kind of modeled my approach to doing trackside coverage from, because I always like to hear it from the driver if I can. If it turns out it's a starting park, you can pretty much tell, but you don't want to take that at face value. And certainly today, where the practice really isn't in the Cup Series, and it's debatable whether it happens in Xfinity or trucks. I think there's possibilities where we've had it in the Truck Series in particular, but I think again it's not as common as it was even back in 2010 as it was. So that's another one to look at there too. But yeah, no, Kevin Buckler's team was definitely another one to kind of think about that too. Let's see here. So from here, I do want to get into talking about the Netflix series at the same time. Thank you again for tuning in here. I know it's well past midnight on the East Coast, but I want to make this good enough for your listening pleasure here, or if you're listening to this the day after, totally understandable here. But I do want to get into the Netflix series because I haven't really commented on that there. So I did watch that this week, and we got through the last episode 2 days ago. And generally speaking, I'm very positive about it. I think that the way that they the way that they portrayed the drivers, I think, was the real heartbeat of that actual series. I think they did a fine job with that. What I think would have been a real problem, I didn't watch as much of the USA series. I think I watched like one episode of that, and I didn't really go into that. Um, I think that when it comes to chronicling the Cup Series and understanding who these drivers are and what the competition is, whether you're and if you're trying to market this to a broader audience, which I do feel this was, I feel like this was definitely done more for a broader audience rather than a very knowledgeable audience that maybe wants to learn a little bit more about these drivers. I think there was some stuff in here that you could discern from that. But I think that the goal was definitely, okay, here's some of our big drivers in the sport. Here's some of the biggest events that they go to, namely the playoff races. And here's some of the big moments that happened during that stretch. I think that was really important. Again, I think my feelings were very positive about it. I think that it wasn't very overly produced. I didn't get the sense that, in the interview segments that they were just reading these lines off. I thought, well, one thing I thought that I really liked was they showed them when they would do these photo ops, and you could see the little back and forth where it's like, Bubba Wallace, hold this jewel and say like, oh, I have this and you don't. And like, you see the little scripting things that do exist where, you have those little bumpers that Fox or NBC put together with the drivers, and they're over the top, and they're all this crazy stuff. And the drivers are, doing things or acting in ways that they would never act, or, things of that nature. I like that it showed that for what it was. And by doing that, it kind of separated out what were pretty brutal moments. I mean, when you see some of these drivers that were eliminated from playoff contention, this was mentioned again on Denny Hamlin's show this week. Again, Denny Hamlin's appearance after Martinsville, when he just put it all out there and it wasn't enough to overcome the wreck that he has at Homestead, or Christopher Bell after the last place finish he had at Phoenix that ended his season. I think that you see just, how much these drivers are invested in, trying to compete for a championship and trying to put together the best season they can, and just how exhausting a season can be. I think that was one thing that, one of the things I think that could have been emphasized a bit more. Maybe it was the limitations of just doing a 5-episode thing, and again, just focusing on those 10 playoff races, but really driving home how much goes into a full season, that it starts back in February, that it ends in November, that you have less than 90 days of an off season, most of which you can't enjoy, whether you won the championship or not. You got to focus so much on the next season and really kind of getting that going. Just how much, the fact that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you have these moments where you're really trying to kind of build a great season, and you feel like things are going your direction, especially for William Byron, who through the first part of 2023 easily had the best season. That, he had every reason to feel that he was going to be, the one that everybody had to take the championship from. But unfortunately, and, the championship format ends up, stepping in there and playing a role too. And so one part of it still has to be explaining this convoluted series. Like, okay, well, you have anybody that wins makes it in, or if they're within a certain number of points, do they still qualify for it? The structure, the format of the playoffs, I think was a point against the series there, because it made it harder to follow. I could see a casual fan being very frustrated with that. It's like, okay, well, it's like this guy, he won these other races and then he won these races, but now he has to win one of these races to make the next round, and is he going to make the next round? And then there were other drivers just off, and this is where the limitation of which drivers were covered there. I'm not as critical of that part of it, in as much as I know some people were saying there's way too much attention on Denny Hamlin in 2311. I didn't feel that way. I know that, there were other drivers that were interested in participating in this that just weren't invited in it. Even drivers that did make the playoffs, like Brad Keselowski, for example. And it would have been nice if they were in it. And it, would have gotten more attention there. But it wasn't quite as full in that sense. I didn't think it was too biased to just Denny Hamlin in 2311, but I was a little disappointed that there weren't more drivers featured. Like maybe you start with like, it would have had to probably expand the series to introduce as many of the 16 playoff drivers as you can. It's really another problem with the playoff system for that way, that you would have to introduce them. And there were some drivers that just got completely ignored, even if they were having a big role in there. I mean, Kevin Harvick, for his retirement season and having that very unceremonious exit from the playoffs at Bristol, that was a massive story. And Harvick's figure in the sport was bigger. Obviously, we saw a lot of ads during the race today about a show that Kevin Harvick is being involved in and it's focusing on his season. Maybe they just didn't go into that in the Netflix thing because that's going to get its own treatment going forward. I don't know how much of the focus in that is going to be on that season. It probably is not going to get that much focus because it just had a very unceremonious end to it compared to other phases of Harvick's career. But I was really surprised that wasn't really shown at all, or even in the Phoenix episode. It didn't get any mention in the last race there. But again, I mean, would that be interesting to somebody that's not a big fan of the series or somebody that's getting into it? Maybe not, because this driver isn't going to be around the next year, or they're just going to be in the booth. So maybe their focus wanted to be on drivers that were, of course, releasing this before the Clash. That was obviously part of their interest, to make sure that they were focusing on drivers that, were going to stay in the series and still be big names, and try to do kind of a drive to survive thing where people can like, oh, suddenly William Byron's going to have a lot of fans, or so and so forth. One comparison. So again, I don't know in terms of like how much it was different from the USA series. I certainly liked that they weren't cute about it. I liked that it was a bit grittier than these race reviews, even like the radio sweetheart thing and all that and stuff. Even that with like, I mean, that's censored and all that stuff, and they kind of play it for laughs a little bit, which is kind of strange. I've never really been crazy about that. But I like in this one that you can hear him curse. I was interested when I first pulled it up and it said it was TVMA. I was like, wow, am I going to see like Brad Keselowski like stub his toe or something? But no, it's like these drivers are like straight up saying like, oh man, I effing deserved it and this and that. And, all these drivers trying to, I think it was almost an overcompensation the other direction, because you always hear these drivers after the race, and they're like, it's like, oh, well, we had a great such and such a car, and the guys did a great job, and oh, we just, gosh darn it, we just missed it a little bit, but I'm looking forward to the next race. And this one here was almost like the exact opposite. Like everybody was copying the Joey Logano script. It's like, I don't like any of these people. I don't want to be friends with any of them. I don't care who I beat. Like, I know I'm at my peak and I'm the best, and then blah blah blah. And it was almost going too far the other way, which I'm fine with. I mean, I think that's way more interesting than going the other way. At least it's not, softballed and all that. I know that's going to be, I'm sure NASCAR is thinking, well, okay, we're probably not going to have a lot of young kids watching this. But I don't think that's necessarily the demographic they're going for. They're going for an older demographic, but not the old demographic. They're trying to go for like that teenage to young adult group there. That isn't going to be having a problem with a bunch of people, saying the F word or whatever and that and all that, and want to see a real raw depiction of NASCAR, something that's conducive to depictions of the NFL or baseball, and seeing people under pressure, under stress, and what happens in those cases and how they handle it and all the demands that are put on them. And yeah, not everybody's going to handle that and just come out of it, not cursing or something like that. If somebody loses a race, you're not going to expect them to be happy about it. I mean, again, I've seen people upset about last place finishing. I mean, obviously that's a frustrating situation, but finishing second is like downright, I think they get just downright furious over that as well. They would, especially if you have the leader right in front of you there and you get to see all that. So I think that was cool. So again, I appreciated that, and I thought it was entertaining. I thought the pacing was good. I liked that. I liked the selection of drivers they had. I felt that it wasn't all one manufacturer. It very easily could have been an all Denny Hamlin, Michael Jordan thing, but it wasn't. You had Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney from Ford. You had Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell from Toyota. It wasn't an all Hendrick thing. It wasn't an all Joe Gibbs thing. It wasn't an all Penske thing. It was kind of all between them. I knew this wasn't going to be a thing where they were going to go to Rick Ware Racing or Live Fast Motorsports or Colleague. It would have been nice. I like that Allmendinger's win at the Roval got shown a little bit. But I like that it balanced that enough. It was a good overview of some of the larger figures, and, somebody that would be interested in it probably would then go on and find out about these other drivers. Like, okay, it's like, these are the guys that are Denny Hamlin's teammates, or these are the guys that are Ryan Blaney's teammates, or so forth. And maybe they'll get interested in them that way, or maybe, something else will happen. So again, it doesn't, because I think the other problem with NASCAR is something can be too overwhelming, that maybe there's too much there, because you could get lost in all the minutia about, the points format and the different teams and the history of the sport, and why he runs this car number or this color, or who the team owner is, and all that, and who the pit crew members are. There's so much else that's going on there. But if you hit the big notes, and I think that's where a lot of this did it, I thought that was pretty good. It actually kind of made a lot of the moments from that playoff season. I mean, you obviously can remember what happened. It's just a few months ago. But it still made it fresh enough that a moment that was big, like Kyle Larson hitting the sand barrels at Homestead, or Denny Hamlin's steering failure in that same race, or a driver just straight missing a setup in some other race, or the brake failure that Christopher Bell had. That was shown as big as it should be. And I appreciated that. I'm glad that was a pretty honest depiction of it. One thing it reminded me of, and this may be kind of going back in kind of people's memory a little bit, it reminded me more, not so much of the USA thing, which again, I didn't watch much of. It reminded me of the HBO one that they featured Jimmy Johnson in 2010, after he won his, I guess that'd be his third, 6, 7, 8, 9, so after his fourth straight championship. So going on to the fifth one, and it was focusing on his preparations for Daytona. And I liked that it showed Jimmy as a bit more personable. And I think that was really important because at that time, yeah, he was a dominant driver, but he was absolutely not the most popular driver. It was still Dale Jr. or Jeff Gordon or, whoever else was in the sport there. But Jimmy was not the most popular one. So I think that was needed to really show, who he was and what he was like, and show more about Chad Knaus too, and what was done. And it ended up being about a 500 he didn't win. Jamie McMurray won it, but it was the kickoff to what became his fifth straight championship season. So I think it's a fascinating time capsule to it. And I think this was a good way to show it. This reminded me a lot of that. The one thing that the HBO one did differently is that one had a narrator in it, because it was modeled more off like Hard Knocks, like the football series that's on HBO. So it kind of had more of a produced feel. It wasn't just the clips of, things are pretty self-explanatory. Maybe graphics would illustrate what race they're going to, or what month it is, or whatever it is. It reminded me more of that, but yeah, it didn't have the narrations. I kind of like the narrations because it kind of ties things together a little bit better. But I think in this series, it probably worked better without it because there was so much footage. And I don't know. I mean, they had the broadcast footage to kind of fill the gaps. And it sounded like they kind of did in post, they kind of either reenacted some radio broadcasts or maybe clips that the broadcasters didn't say, which I think is kind of also indicative of where the modern broadcasts are still failing to do what they need to do, which is informing us. I could really tell that there was some moments in there that, that wasn't from the broadcast. This is somebody else rephrasing it in the same way and trying to make it sound like it's a bit clearer there. This is kind of a corollary to this too. And this is something that I think every NASCAR documentary just hasn't been able to escape, which is unfortunate, is using sound effects. I don't know if I've mentioned that a lot on the show here, but that's something that really gets under my skin. When I went into this one here, that was the first thing I thought that they were going to do. It's like, oh, they're going to add sound effects to this. They're going to, like the sounds of the sport are not enough. So whenever there's a crash, they have to, get a Foley artist to play the sound of somebody spinning out or hitting a wall. Or when somebody hits the wall, there's got to be a massive bass boost to it. It's one thing to have like the actual sounds like amplified. It's another thing to add them in there. And I've watched enough of these documentaries where you can really hear it, and it just doesn't make sense to me, because this is a sport that produces its own soundtrack. You don't need to add anything more to it. What you need to do is you need to have somebody with a microphone sitting in the right spot that's going to pick that sound up. You need to have the broadcaster voice brought down a little bit, so it becomes part of the experience and not the only thing you hear. Your aggressive goes around. It's like nobody cares about that. Like get an actual moment there where you hear the actual sound that a car makes, and you can hear it from plenty far away. I've talked on this show before about standing in the pit road when Kyle Larson and Bubba Wallace had their wreck in Vegas, and the fact that when they hit a wall, it doesn't sound like the Foley artist does. It sounds like a lid of a trash can getting slammed, because they're we have a fiberglass body running into a hollow metal girder, and it has this very distinctive sound to it. If you use the authentic sounds of the sport, that's going to be really interesting. And if the sport sounds aren't good enough, well, then either you got to get some better mics, or you got to fix the sanctioning body's got to fix that problem. So that was something that irritated me. I noticed that especially in the super speedway footage when they were doing Daytona and Talladega, and they would have an accident footage that would be from a blimp view, for example. We still got to see just a little bit of Brennan Poole's very hard impact that he had at Daytona that year. That still irritates me, because it's just not necessary. It's gilding the lily to me. I think that you really got to just work with what you have and be as authentic as possible, because people respond to that. You don't, if you want to add music and you want to add a narrator, that's different. People can pick that out. But when it comes to the sounds, I've never liked that. It just screams fake to me. And I'm sure even people outside the sport can notice that too. Because, it's the equivalent of like the Wilhelm scream. You got like certain car sound effects where it's like, well, that's not the right engine note, or that's not what it would sound like to hit this. If a car hits a tire barrier versus hitting a metal barrier, or something of that nature. So, again, I don't mean to make too much of a point of it, but it was something, again, I noticed from that. In terms of the production, I felt like, I think my brother and I did our championship picks basically after we finished that series. And actually, I noticed when we were talking about it, he kind of noticed, he felt like he had a better appreciation for William Byron in his career in particular. He was very impressed with how they showed his career to that point. And I thought that was really cool. Like, they actually showed, how it confronted it head on. There's other documentaries that NASCAR's done recently where they kind of just, they just kind of weave around it, and it's just kind of the narrative of what the story is. But with this one here, it's like, yeah, this guy started playing video games. Okay. You can talk about video games versus simulators or whatever, but he did start off with it. And there was a lot of skepticism about if he could transition that into racing, and that he struggled with that. But once he actually got out on the track, he was fast. And that spoke to the legitimacy of his ascent through the sport, that, that he learned it in a very different way, but it wasn't a way that was not conducive to success in the sport. And I think that was presented very honestly. It wasn't like, he's just a prodigy and nothing was ever difficult for him. It's like, no, this is just part of it. So I liked that. I liked seeing the drivers kind of what they do in between to kind of, motivate themselves, or to kind of decompress after a difficult week, for example, whether it's Denny Hamlin framing an article on the wall saying, he's going to win a championship soon, or, things of that nature. No, I thought that was good. So, again, there's definitely some pros and cons for the Netflix deal. But I'm not necessarily a person that's going to be head over heels about it. Like, oh, it's the best thing I've ever seen. It's definitely up there. It's up there. I think it's right up there with the Jimmy Johnson one. I thought, I don't know where else that is. I don't know if HBO still has it in their archives. I haven't really looked online. I recorded it years ago. But it's the closest I've seen to that. And it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think it's one that, it shows that there's a lot at stake in this sport. And there's a lot that goes into, getting these cars to the track. There's a lot to competing in the sport, and that these drivers are athletes, and what they encounter, and that it's exciting, and that going to the track is an exciting thing. I like that they had Marty Smith in there to talk about the sensory overload that you get when you go to a race. I think that was very accurately described. They had other people bringing up Steve Letarte and others bringing that up. Was Shannon Spake was in it too. They had others that brought those details up. So that was pretty cool. I thought that was nice. So I think for people that are very passionate about the sport, I think they get a fresh look at drivers that's a little bit more loose, that's a little bit closer to, I think, what we all want, where NASCAR isn't clamping down and, penalizing somebody for coming on their podcast and saying that they wrecked somebody running for 25th and they took both of them out. Something where, drivers are able to show their personalities. And I think that in some way, I think that these drivers are kind of stretching their legs a little bit in this documentary, and they're all kind of really kind of playing up that it's like, they're really competitive. They're really, they don't look at these other drivers as friends. These are other opponents, and they got to beat them, and they got to outthink them. And the mental game is massive these days, and what goes into it. And I think new fans could be very interested in that at the same time. I think that for us older ones, we can see a fresher side of these drivers, and for new fans, they can get pulled into the spectacle of it. I think that the way, in spite of the other sound effects that are added, I think when they show the authentic sound of the sport, it's the closest thing to actually being at the track. I think when you see it on a big screen, when you see it shown the way it is, without all the other graphics and stuff that's in the way, it's like standing there on pit road, and it's really exciting, and I think that's a good way to do it. A step ahead of, say, something like NASCAR 3D back in 2004, where it was much more, again, a narrator. There was a lot of hype behind footage. It kind of hopped around a lot. I felt like it was a little bit too basic. In this one here, it kind of had the little nuances there, like the sensory things the drivers do, like where it's all about hand-eye coordination and all that. That was very interesting. And again, and I do feel like it probably came to about the closest balance you could get to having something for new fans and older fans at the same time. And I do think that more of it was geared toward newer fans. I think that every one of the interviews had that attitude of saying, like these drivers introducing themselves to the crowd, and then the commentators really saying, trying to impart to new viewers, like, this is what NASCAR is. This is what makes it different from these other sports. And, not saying everything has to be deadly serious, but I liked that it took things a bit more seriously, that it showed the sport is, it's very dangerous. These drivers are very brave to encounter the risks that they do. And those risks are still out there. Doesn't matter what the safety level of the car is or anything like that. And this car itself has, of course, had its share of problems and still continues to, whether from a competition side or a safety side. And those are still being worked out. But racing is never going to be entirely safe either. And these drivers know that. And I think that you can't kid around or laugh about that. You got to just be stone-faced about that. And just really kind of take a step back and realize that. And I think new viewers would be very interested. It's like, well, you could pay money to see this. It's like, yeah, absolutely. 36 to 38 times a year, if you want to see the exhibition races or whatnot. So I thought that was good. And that is the important thing, is to bring in newer fans. I've always, I think my view to newer fans in the sport is the same with new teams. I think it's very important. I think you constantly have to have new people in there, because they bring something else that's new into the sport too. Maybe they look at the sport in a way that you hadn't anticipated before. Maybe an aspect of the sport that you weren't interested in is something maybe they're really interested in. Maybe they're really interested in the pit stops. Maybe they're really interested in the sponsors. Maybe they're really interested in, just any little aspect of the car. I mean, there's plenty enough to go digging deep into. Or maybe they're interested in the history. Maybe they get a taste of that. They listen to the Scene Vault or Stapleton's videos or something, and they kind of check that out. There's a lot that's out there. And I do hope that, maybe some were watching the race tonight. Maybe some of you are in the chat tonight here watching the show. If you are, welcome. I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable being able to talk about this sport or hear about the sport or share thoughts about it. And I think that's very important. If it's all for one age group, people get older, and you want to make sure that it's getting passed on to somebody, because you'd like to believe that it's going to keep going, for the indeterminate future. And I think that that's very big. So I'm sure NASCAR would have rather had a weekend here where they could have had this event on Sunday when it was originally scheduled, where they had a full crowd on hand, where they had the last chance qualifiers. But I think in the interest of building on that series just this week, I think getting it on Saturday, rather than stretching it out to Wednesday in the middle week when nobody was going to be able to see it, was, I think, their best play. And I hope that it pays dividends for the sport, because for all we may disagree with certain things that the sport does or certain decisions they make, we all want it to do well. And I think that this Netflix deal was a very good faith effort. I don't believe it was trying to make the sport look ridiculous. I don't think it did it in an inaccurate way. I felt that it was trying to be as genuine as possible without sliding into schlocky reality show garbage. I felt that it was very efficient storytelling. I think probably more of my complaints would be focused more on the championship system itself, which the series had nothing to do with. It's working within the paradigm that we see the sport in today. I'm actually kind of working on a script that is going to discuss that more at length too. But yeah, I think it was very positive. I'm glad that the response has been good. I'm glad that a lot of people have been seeing it. I'm glad that it's been performing well at Netflix in general. And I hope that that's going to be something that's going to be, a long-term success for the sport moving forward there. So, without kind of repeating myself, that's kind of where I am with that. So I was very pleased with it. I enjoyed it. We didn't binge it in one night. We got it done in, I think, 3 nights this week here, but very much enjoyed it. I was excited for the next one to kind of keep going. It had great narrative momentum. I think that that's a real trick to getting people to watch long form content. And I hope that new viewers were able to experience it that same way. I hope that that was their experience, because I think that was really, important. But that'll be a different way to look at that. Let's see here. So, let's see. What other notes do I have? I'm sorry. Let me make sure I got all the notes I wanted to kind of cover here. I think that's most of it. Yeah, NASCAR full speed. Yes. Another thing I kind of want to mention here at the same time. Again, big thanks to those of you checking out the show tonight. I know it's very late on the East Coast here. We'll wrap up here in a little bit. We'll do some trivia questions for those of you night owls wanting to stick around here for a little bit. Another couple of things I kind of want to mention with the Patreon. I'm very excited about another project, talk about the sports history. AC Racing 24 on YouTube is putting together a tremendous push to get NASCAR Racing 2 and NASCAR Racing 1999 edition, two of the, I think, most significant NASCAR sim race programs in existence here. I know we're talking about William Byron earlier and learning through iRacing. A lot of people from iRacing were the original Papyrus Sierra group that was involved in these old simulators back in the late 90s, and being able to, make paint schemes and things of that nature. I'm very excited with what AC Racing 24 has done to increase awareness of this program, to make it available so it's operational on modern systems. I actually just recently downloaded it this week, and it works just as well as it did back in 2015 when I was doing the full field accelerate races videos here on this channel, or even back in 2001 when I was playing it in my freshman year of college there. It's really refreshing to see. And again, talking about something being passed to the next generation, I'm very excited to see that this person has also been in contact with the folks over at Storm Motor Group and IWC Cars that produced a lot of the paint schemes that were used, and car sets from different seasons. There were car sets from back to, I think, 1965, all the way up to like 2004. that were designed for this simulator. It's one that I very much enjoyed over the years, and it got me looking back into my old files as well. And I've been thinking about something to do with this over the years. The last time I was really playing around with the simulator, I made a car set of NASCAR contenders using a 1991 body style of like old Pontiacs and stuff. And I made like these different paint schemes. And if you're interested in that, and if you downloaded the program, you can actually download that. It's a free post on my Patreon at patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. I posted that just this week. So if you're interested in downloading that and racing against Carl Long and Jeff Fuller and Wayne Edwards and some others, you get to have that experience as well. I believe it's a full 38 car list there. That was the latest experiment I've had with that. I'm not the most professional paint scheme person out there. It's not the same quality as say you see a lot of, certainly not the only ones you see out of people that do stuff in Forza or whatever these other simulators are these days. Certainly in iRacing in particular. But just if you're looking for something where you can play around with it, like an old simulator there, it's definitely still good for that. If you are a paying member of the Patreon, I also uploaded my comprehensive 1991 NASCAR Winston Cup car set that I modified. I actually, if you want to know what I did, pretty much my last 2 years of high school and into my first year of college, probably my first semester of college, I was playing around with this, and I just really got into it. That was a time where I was kind of really looking at the history of the sport. I was looking at videotapes, trying to get these paint schemes accurate from that season, and I'll be curious what you guys think. I just uploaded that, and it has, I believe, about 120 different paint schemes or something in there. I have them split up based on short track paint schemes versus super speedways. You can drive, I pretty much have all JD McDuffie's paint schemes in there. RK Smith's and Winston West cars in there as well. I got Elmo Langley's Winston Legends winner in there. I wrote biographies for them. I tried to adjust the AI stats to make them competitive, at least as accurate as possible there. And yeah, so if you're into the AC Racing 24 deal, you can download that those car sets as well, and those are available in the Patreon. I've reached out to AC24 if you needed any of the other car sets that I still have here. I think he has pretty much all the ones that I have, but we're going to kind of pool our resources there down the line. He's still sorting out through a lot of material that he got from these other folks here, and it's very exciting. I think it's going to be a lot of fun there, but if you're interested in some for your own need, in the meantime, I got those available on the Patreon. Then again, that's patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. Big thanks to those of you who have been participating in that there as well. I'm looking to get some more content for you, including advanced access to the next videos I'm working on, and looking to create some exclusive content. As you saw on my mention on Twitter recently, I just sorted out through my racing shirts just recently this week here. I may do a video on that as well, something down the line there too, kind of feature some of the other ones from that. Again, I just keep saying, Ryan Daly, Harris Lou, so many of the other guys are just making such just beautiful shirts these days. I'm glad to see that art form really kind of returning to prominence there as well. And I love to support those creators whenever I can at the same time. But that'll be another thing to kind of explore a little bit later at the same time there too. Let's see here. Connor Ritchie, yeah, 2007 duels, yeah, those were exciting. That was James Hilton trying to qualify for the Daytona 500. That was really exciting too. So I hope you guys enjoy that at the same time. Alrighty. I'm just kind of checking over the chat here to see if there's anything else I missed. Kind of want to make sure I get that on there. Okay. Yeah, so we got that. Alrighty, we'll tell you what. We're kind of running long here on the show here tonight. We're about an hour and a half into the show here. We'll go ahead and wrap up with some trivia questions here. For those of you still sticking around, we'll do a couple of these here to kind of wrap up for this evening. And then we'll hop into our next show, which is going to be after the Daytona 500 here in a couple weeks. We'll talk about all the action from the Truck Series, ARCA Series, Xfinity Series, and Cup Series during the week here. So it's going to be real exciting, real quick here. I don't think we're going to do a show on Super Bowl weekend. We might. We'll see how things shake out there. But we'll find out how that goes. Let's see here. So we'll bring out our trusty 1990s deal here. and we'll go ahead and do some questions off of this. So go ahead and let me know in the chat which category you'd like. NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card are again the categories. NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card are your categories there. So we'll jump into that. If it's a little slow in the chat, I'll just pick a category here, and we'll do a couple of questions here for the evening. For those of you, or if you're tuning in a bit later, watching this the next day here, we'll jump into that. But hope you guys enjoyed the action this weekend there for sure. I'm just glad to get back into the racing series again this weekend. I'm just so glad they got the racing in today. I was starting to think through the week. I got a lot of obligations at work this week that I know it would be difficult to kind of juggle this around. I was thinking, well, if it's on a Wednesday, I might be able to make that work. But man, oh man, I mean, there's going to be like 5 people in the stands if it gets stretched to that point. So I'm so glad that worked out. I still hate it for the people that weren't going to be able to come in tomorrow. But I mean, while I don't think that the storm is going to be as bad as what they're saying, I think they're just being overly cautious with this. I think certainly the logistics of putting on an event in the middle of it, it's reminiscent of Fontana last year. They're probably keeping that in mind during all of that too. Alrighty, so we got 3 for drivers. We'll go ahead and just jump into drivers here and do some questions on that. Alrighty, first question here. What driver was the NASCAR Winston Cup champ in 1977? What driver was the NASCAR Winston Cup champ in 1977? One thing I also kind of want to touch on a little bit in talking about the videos there. Since last September, you may notice in the videos that I put on the channel, I haven't really played the traditional outro that I've had, where I put the names on the side of the car rolls by, and then there's like tributes to people that have passed away in the motorsports community in recent months. Some of the other videos I've done, including like the September 11th video that I did there, it didn't feel appropriate to put that thing at the end because it felt like too upbeat. It felt like it kind of clashed too much of the video, and I don't want people getting frustrated with that. So I hadn't used it for a couple of those videos there. I'm still kind of on the fence on using it for 500 days. It probably wouldn't be a big deal. I should probably phase it back in. But in that time, and it's been since, August or September, and of course the answer to this question here, and you're mentioning it here already, Cale Yarborough, one of the many people involved in the sport that we have lost since September. And the list is actually, I've been keeping track of it on my phone, and it's reached a point now where it's now been so many different people that I haven't mentioned in these outros here that it would almost be like too long of a list. Sorry, my light just went out here. It feels like it would be almost like too much if I just kind of had a whole long list of these people at the end of it. But I'm almost thinking of just doing a standalone video to kind of catch up on that. Because I mean, there's been a lot of people, big and small in the sport, that even in just a relatively short time, it's been pretty bad. In the whole scheme of things here, whether it's Cale Yarborough or Gilles DeFerrin, or Mike Wallace's wife, or just multiple other competitors here. Really going back to I think the first one I had the note was when we lost Martin Truex's girlfriend there, Sherry Pollux. So there was that, and I think I might do a standalone video on that. I don't know if people would be interested in that or not. Maybe I'll do something with that. I also don't want to kind of get in the note of doing, too many of those. It's just like, I was looking at the list and I'm like, my goodness, it just seems like we just had a disproportionate number of people that we've lost in the motorsports community in just the last like 5 months. And it probably is, maybe it is worth doing like a video in its own right there. But we'll see. That's not a primary focus right now. But I'd like to still use that outro that I have in the future. And maybe we'll change the format there up a little bit. Ken Squire, another one for sure. Definitely kind of heavy on my mind here coming into Daytona here in a couple weeks. And I am planning on doing a Daytona 500 starting grid coming up here in a couple weeks there as well. So we'll see how that shakes out. That'll be something we'll kind of look at in the near future. What driver was the NASCAR Winston Cup champion in 1977? Indeed, you guys got it. Cale Yarborough is the correct answer there. Alrighty. That one's a little bit too easy. Let me see. Alrighty. Not that one. What driver, next question, what driver posted wins in a NASCAR record 18 consecutive years? Now, keep in mind, this is an older device here from the late 90s, so it's going to be a bit of a different deal here. But this is the question again. What driver posted wins in a NASCAR record 18 consecutive years? That's the next question. What driver posted wins in a NASCAR record 18 consecutive years? Yes, R.I.P. Ken Squire for sure. Yeah, it may do something like that. It probably wouldn't be bad to just do a brief video there on that. That's still something, it's among the things I'm kind of juggling here at the channel here, but I'm hopeful we're going to get some content here for you here in the near future. Now that we're getting the season started up here and kind of getting back into more the rhythm of everything. I know I have one script that I've been meaning to kind of get polished and recorded this week here. We haven't quite got to that yet, but I think that'll kind of get things going there because that'll probably be a shorter video. Alrighty, so here's a question again. What driver posted wins in a NASCAR record 18 consecutive years? The answer is Richard Petty. Richard Petty is the correct answer. A couple of you got that. Yep, Connor, you got it there. Wayne, you got it as well. Richard Petty. Alrighty, let's see here. Alrighty, we'll just do one more question tonight because it's kind of been late. We already had my light burn out here at the same time, so we'll get that recharged. Last question for the evening here, folks. What driver was the 1992 NASCAR Busch Series Rookie of the Year? Now, don't look it up. Try to guess it here. What driver was the 1992 NASCAR Busch Series Rookie of the Year? That's the question. Thank you, Death Killer, for saying hi there at the beginning. Sorry if I missed you there. I'm sure you're probably asleep by now. Very much appreciated, Adam. Thank you very much. You're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoy the channel. Like I say, anything, if you're able to share the videos here on this channel, get other people to check out this stream, they can tune in here, especially if you've got the Daytona 500. That's always one of our biggest shows. We're going to certainly have a big one here this year to talk about all the action there from Speed Weeks. That'll be really exciting. So we'll get ready for that. Yeah, definitely make sure to share the stream or share other videos on this channel. We can check. We'll have hopefully some new people here. Hopefully some people that are brought in by the Netflix series. I'd love it if they make themselves known in here as well. And we'll get the season started on the right foot for sure. So we'll find out. What driver was the 1992 NASCAR Busch Series Rookie of the Year? We got guesses for Jeff Burton and Jeff Gordon, Robert Presley. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. The answer is Ricky Craven from Newburgh, Maine. Ricky Craven is the correct answer. The 1992 NASCAR Busch Series Rookie of the Year. Not the Cup Series. That would have been Jimmy Hensley, but 1992 was Ricky Craven in the Busch Series. So that will do it for the show tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you very much enjoyed NASCAR back in action today. Again, hoping for safe travels for everyone heading out of the LA area there after the race. And we'll be weathering the storm here as well, here at NASCAR headquarters. And we will have our next show, which is going to be after the Daytona 500, a week from 2 weeks from tomorrow, rather. Yeah, tomorrow's already Sunday, or today if you're already on the East Coast. So in the meantime, my Twitter feed is at LastCarOnBrock. The website is lastcar.info. I hope, again, you enjoy the new format to that site. We debuted that during our last show here in January. Still working the bugs out of it, so please, by all means, let me know what you think about it, and then we can keep fine-tuning that and getting that ready to go. So it's your new home for your last place content here. New articles coming up here for both the Clash and the Mexico Series race here as well very shortly. In the meantime, yeah, check that out. Patreon.com/NASCAR. I'm Brock for the Patreon. So have a very safe week. Have a wonderful evening, folks, and I will see you all next time. Thank you, everyone, for your support.